Judy had always marked time in phases. This was by far the most confusing phase of her life. Just a few months ago, she'd been the best braindance editor in all of Night City, working out of the basement of Lizzie's bar. The hurt of her breakup with Maiko still fresh, even though she'd proven herself to be just as manipulative as she was seductive. She hadn't known anyone named V, had only started to consider leaving Night City for better pastures, and would never have imagined herself in the position she was in now. But she didn't regret it. Instead, she'd embraced this newest phase of her life, even though somewhere deep in the back of her mind, she knew it would be chaotic and brief. The next few days passed quickly as they tried to settle into their new way of life, learning what they could by watching the Aldecaldos go about their business. Life in the camp seemed to start at dawn, and there was a peacefulness and quiet in the air as they would slowly trickle out of their tents in search of coffee and breakfast to start their day. As far as the coffee went, it wasn't what she would define as being good. Honestly, it was barely drinkable, but it did pack quite a punch and managed to achieve the desired effect. Breakfast was certainly a mixed bag, though. There was plenty of synthetic eggs and sausage, which could be grabbed from one of the trucks, though many in the camp seemed to share in some of their own personal stashes they had brought with them. Judy had seen them passing around rolls and sweets, powdered milk, sodas, and even the occasional strip of bacon. Real bacon, too, and not the synthetic kind which tasted like anything but bacon and made you want to barf an hour later. Where it came from, she wasn't sure and didn't dare to ask, but it didn't stop her from accepting when someone had offered her a few strips. As the days progressed, the others would get to work with whatever task was at hand. It wasn't a flurry of activity like she had expected, but rather a constant hum of energy which kept everyone at an even pace throughout the day. The cars and trucks would be worked on to make sure they were well maintained, and any repairs from the rough haul across the desert would be made. Others would get in their vehicles and drive out in small groups, always in different directions, to scout their surroundings and to keep watch. While they had not seen any sign of life in the 3 days they had been on the road, there was always a chance there might be a rogue clan or group of scavengers nearby who might try to pull something unwise. Pan Am had made it a point to keep a tight perimeter, not letting anyone drift off, and make sure that the basilisk was positioned near the front of the camp at all times. If anyone happened to stumble across their camp, the tank sent a formidable message not to do something they would quickly regret. With water in limited supply, everyone also had to be judicious in cleaning themselves and to make sure not a single drop was wasted. V and Judy had fortunately brought some of their own personal care items with them before they had left and found that, for the time being, the liquid soap did a good job of keeping themselves clean without using much water, even if they couldn't enjoy the relaxation of a long, hot shower. They had also quickly learned not to waste time cleaning themselves in the morning. The best time was always in the late afternoon when the sun and heat had already done its work, and piles of sweaty clothing could then be thrown into the communal basin they used for washing. Shortly after lunch on the 3rd day of their new life at the camp, V and Judy had spotted a pair of Aldecaldos emptying the latrines behind the tents which had been set up a short walk away from the camp. Privacy, they had learned, was something which was in short supply. V was lying on the cot in their tent, scrolling through some of the messages on her holo when Judy suddenly stormed in and immediately sat herself down in the chair by the small table without saying a word. V glanced up and saw a bizarre look on Judy's face and asked if everything was all right. Judy's head shifted towards V's direction, but her expression didn't change. "Was using the bathroom. Dude walked in, asked when I would be done, then walked right back out." V stared back at Judy for a moment, before she began to crack up laughing. She certainly felt sympathy for her, and the lack of privacy was something they were both struggling with. But the mental image which had appeared in her head of what Judy had just described was something she couldn't ignore or pass up. "The fuck, V? It's not funny. It's disgusting," Judy shouted back at her, though the venom was lacking in her tone and V thought she could see her trying to suppress a smile of her own. "Welcome to the ass end of nowhere," V replied, opening her arms as though to welcome Judy to the new normal before she leaned forward. the laughter disappearing as an intense gaze crossed her face. So, what did you tell him? Judy's eyes widened before she threw her hands in the air and stormed back out of the tent, leaving V to fall back onto their cot and laugh to herself. In the hours just before evening when they would eat dinner, the camp once again returned to a state of calm as they cleaned themselves and rested after the long day's labor. As the heat dissipated, a soothing coolness began to descend on the camp, and V and Judy found themselves napping next to each other. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when Judy suddenly awoke. She didn't recall if she was dreaming or if a noise from outside had woken her, but her senses had snapped back suddenly. She turned her head and saw V laying on her back, staring up towards the ceiling of the tent. Her hands were folded on her lap, and she hadn't noticed yet that Judy was awake. She seemed lost in thought as her eyes slowly darted across the fabric above her. Judy watched her for a few moments, trying to figure out what she was thinking about. V's breathing seemed faster than it should have been if she had just woken up herself, and Judy sensed that her eyes weren't really seeing what they were looking at. She slowly reached over and put her hand on top of V's, causing her to flinch before she rolled onto her side to meet Judy's gaze. "Hey," Judy said in a quiet voice with a smile. "Hey," V replied with a smile of her own, though Judy noticed that she had needed to put effort into the gesture. Judy's hand found its way to the side of V's head and began to trace her fingers through her hair, which caused V to close her eyes as she enjoyed the pleasant sensation. Judy delicately pulled her forward and tilted V's face to meet her own before their lips met. Judy felt an urgency beginning to grow within her as their mouths crashed against each other at a faster pace. Judy's tongue began to dart across V's lips and into her open mouth, finding her own. V pulled Judy more tightly into the kiss and allowed her hand to begin to roam across Judy's shoulder, sliding further down her arm before tracing its way back up. Judy felt a hand rest on her thigh and squeeze gently, causing her to breathe in sharply as the heat continued to build within her. Her own hand began to drift down, away from V's shoulder before gently cupping her breast. She allowed her thumb to gently rub against the sensitive nub that clung to the shirt she wore and moaned when she felt V's hand mirror the motion upon her own breast. Suddenly, V pulled back, her eyes fluttering. "Oh, okay. This needs to be put on hold till later." Judy felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. "You serious?" V smiled, and Judy could see that this time it was done without effort. "Hey, I wouldn't mind having a go at you right now, but I think we already get more than a few stares around here." V sat up and began to stand, letting out a laugh as Judy's hand dragged down her clothes and pathetically plopped onto the bed. Judy groaned. "Pure bullshit. Such a tease." Slowly, she sat up and tried to pull herself back together. "Were you all right earlier? You looked like you were spaced out." "Yeah, I guess I was kinda just thinking about things," V replied absently. Judy stretched her neck and looked out the small crack between the folds of fabric which draped over the entrance of the tent, noticing that the sun was beginning to set and that activity was picking up outside once again as the clan gathered for dinner. Judy had quickly taken to this being her favorite time of the day. She was used to being a night owl in Night City, often not getting back to her apartment until after the sun had begun to rise the following day. And while the nomads didn't act like a group of drunkards at Lizzie's bar at 3 a.m, they did have kids with them after all. The drinks still flowed freely around the campfires, and there was an eclectic form of energy that Judy could feel pulse through her. She could also see the stars again, something which she hadn't seen in years, not since the last time she had visited her grandparents in Oregon and found herself thinking how amazing it would be to swim in that sea of stars.
Might be an idea for another tattoo.
"Yeah? What kind of things? I'm supposed to be the brooding one, you know," Judy said as she turned to look back at V. She had thrown her jacket on as the air was beginning to cool, and the nights had a tendency to be deceptively cold. Of course, they had found their own ways of keeping each other warm at night. Hopefully their neighbors in the nearest tents didn't mind. V smiled as she began to lace her boots. "Not brooding. Give me a little credit here." just was thinking about what's in store for us. Where we want to go, what we want to do, all that good stuff. So, don't see us hanging around with a bunch of desert folk for long either? Judy asked. It was a question which had been on her mind since they had left. There had been no time to think or plan when V had asked her to leave Night City with her, and Judy had already had one foot out the door, so it had made sense at the time to just go with the flow. She had known that V was close friends with Pan Am and had been inducted into their clan, which was something she still couldn't wrap her head around. How did a mercenary, who'd grown up in the most corrupt and violent city on Earth, become accepted by a free-roaming group of nomads who despised that very way of life? Judy suddenly realized her question might not have come across the way she had intended and quickly added, I mean, these are great people, V, and I don't mean nothing about them. Just don't think I want to be living out of this tent forever. No, I don't think so. I mean, I care about these people like they were family, but can't say I see myself living in this tent forever either, V said. Judy had noticed an odd flicker in V's face as she spoke, but it had only been there for the briefest instant, and Judy wasn't able to put her finger on it before V had moved on. Bumped into Pan earlier. How'd you like to take another road trip with me tomorrow and swing down to Phoenix? Judy stood up as she felt her spirits immediately begin to lift. Hell yeah! Was starting to wonder when we get ourselves down there. Would be nice to have some time just to the two of us also, Judy said as she turned to pick up her own boots off the ground, giving V a view of her backside which she hadn't intended to be subtle. V smirked and shook her head slightly before turning her attention back to lacing up her other boot. 3 of us. Pan's gonna come too to make the intro with her contact. Sorry. That doesn't worry you at all? I thought she knew this person. Not sure I'd trust a doc that needs an in-person referral from an Aldecaldo, V. Judy slid on her own boots as she spoke. She was starting to feel uncomfortable with the whole situation. Beggars can't be choosers, dude. If Pan trusts him enough to dig around in my head, that's about as good as I can hope for. Judy nodded silently. She had only spoken with Pan Am a couple of times since they had left and didn't know her well. V seemed to trust her without hesitation, though, which did help to give Judy some confidence in the situation. Still, the whole thing made her feel uneasy, and she didn't know whether it was the situation with this contact they were going to meet or what they might learn about V's condition and future. V stood up and offered her hand to Judy as she seemed to sense the disquiet in her mind. Come on, I'm starving. Food always helps calm the mind, Jude. Judy couldn't help but grin as she took V's hand and allowed her to raise her off the cot. When are you ever not starving, V? All right, let's grab some grub. Together they made their way out of the tent and stopped for a moment to survey their options. It was a calm evening, and the smoke from the grills around the camp seemed to leave a thin layer of fog which blanketed the area in a delicious smell and caused the setting sun to cast a strange glow over everything. Usually, groups of a dozen or so would gather to eat together before they mingled elsewhere, and it was almost like a small slice of Night City had been cut out and lifted into the desert. Based on the smell which had entered her nostrils, Judy could tell someone close by was boiling noodles, while another grill likely had... Was that chicken? Probably synthetic, but still, a vast improvement from what they had been eating the past few days. And the sound of glass clanking against glass as bottles of beer were taken out of coolers was a welcome sound for everyone. Damn, V said as she took in a deep whiff. That smells good. I'm going all in on those noodles. You? Yeah, why not? Judy replied. Gotta see if that chef over there has got anything over the place I used to grab noodles from across from Lizzie's. Now that was some preem chow. They walked between the tents, saying hello and waving as others passed their way and did the same. Judy still felt out of place and wasn't used to everyone being so friendly. It required some degree of effort to keep up with the pleasantries, though she supposed there were far worse things in the world than people being genuinely kind to one another. Eventually, they found themselves standing in front of a small griddle with a pair of large pots which were filled with boiling water. The woman standing behind them threw in a large scoop of noodles and began to season the water while Judy and V eagerly waited, counting the minutes as their hunger grew. As soon as their plates had been filled, they had quickly sat down together on a large crate next to one of the campfires and had begun to gorge themselves on the meal. "Don't know if it compares, but damn good," Judy muttered between bites as a noodle slid off her sticks and landed on the sand below. "You said it," V managed to spit out. Her mouth was full as she quickly scarfed one bite after another. Judy watched her with amusement.
That woman can just eat.
"There they are," a familiar voice called out. Judy glanced up to see Pan Am walking towards them. She also noticed how quickly V put down her plate and stood before pulling Pan Am in for a hug. She didn't fully understand the relationship between them. After they parted, Pan Am turned to Judy and, before she could say anything or even finish the noodles she had been chewing in her mouth, Pan Am had wrapped an arm around Judy's shoulder and had given her a quick squeeze before letting go. Judy felt caught off guard, though in that simple gesture, she felt she had just learned more about Pan Am than she would have any other way. Judy looked up at Pan Am and V and smiled as she finished her bite. Judy started to stand before Pan Am urged her to stay sitting. "Oh, please, don't get up. I just finished and need to sit for a while. Been a long day. I'll be right back." With that said, Pan Am made her way towards a cooler which had been placed against a nearby trailer and opened it, digging inside before emerging with a cold bottle. V, in the meantime, had sat back down next to Judy and had resumed her rapid consumption of the few noodles which were still left on her plate. Pan Am smacked the top of the bottle against the cooler, a move which seemed as natural as breathing for her, knocking the cap off the top. She then turned and made her way back before sitting down across from them and taking a long swig. Pan Am let out a refreshing sigh as the cold liquid worked its way down her throat. As she glanced at Judy and V, she motioned back to the cooler. "Want one?" Judy had glanced at V and saw her glance back at her. The answer had been obvious, and before long, the three of them had bottles open and were enjoying the soothing ambiance as the sun set below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the evening sky. Judy began to hear music being strummed on a guitar somewhere, but couldn't see where it was coming from. Pan Am took another drink before resting the nearly empty bottle on the ground. She looked at Judy and V. "So, you two ready for tomorrow? Judy, I hear you're tagging along." "Yeah," Judy replied, feeling as though she was being put on the spot or evaluated somehow. "Anything that involves getting help for V, I'm there." "Good," Pan Am said, glancing over at V with a small smile and a nod of her head. Judy noticed the small gesture and, out of the corner of her eye, caught V do the same. She still felt like she was playing catch-up with these two, but the silence that followed told her that whatever was going on, it wasn't something she necessarily needed to be worried about. "Plan is for the three of us to take off just after breakfast," Pan Am explained. "Mitch and Carol will trail behind and break off a few miles after we cross the border so that they can scout the area and make sure it's safe for the rest of us to set up camp later. Best guess? We'll probably get to Phoenix in the evening. We'll pack in some place for the night and meet up with my contact the next morning." V nodded in agreement with the plan. "What can you tell me about this contact of yours? I wouldn't trust us showing up without you there." Judy continued to finish her meal, feeling somewhat relieved that V had chosen to broach the topic instead of leaving it for her to do. The situation was already awkward enough without having some braindance editor from Night City that Pan Am barely knew to start questioning her plans. Pan Am rolled her eyes and shook her head slightly. "It's not that. He's actually a damn good neurologist who's helped us out before. He hates corpse, too. Took his practice underground a while back. We just have some history, is all." "Damn, Pan. Lovers quarrel?" V winked as she took delight in teasing her. "Shut it, V," Pan Am replied, though the curtness of her response and the fact that she didn't expand any further made it clear that V wasn't far off the mark. Judy began to feel better about things as she took another swig from her beer. Trust took time to build, and not knowing Pan Am well or fully trusting her, much less this contact of hers they were pinning their hopes to, had caused a variety of scenarios to play out in her mind. Was this contact in bed with Arasaka? Biotechnica? Would he look to sell them out as soon as they walked through the door? But as she had listened to the conversation, the wild conspiracies began to dissipate from her mind and a single thought began to emerge.
This guy might really be able to help V.
Judy took a final swig from her drink, emptying it and setting the bottle aside. A shiver coursed through her as she felt the cool liquid run through her stomach. She remembered it was going to be a cold night and she hadn't put a jacket on before they had left the tent. Gonk. Judy stood just as V was finishing her noodles and walked over to where a pile of wood had been hastily stacked. Grabbing a pair of the biggest logs she could grab with each hand, she walked back to the fire and nonchalantly tossed them on top of the fire, causing a flurry of smoke and ash to rise. Looking down at V as she rubbed the dust from her hands, she saw V looking back with a mix of surprise and happiness on her face. Judy glanced over at Panam and saw the same expression on her face. What? Panam smiled at her and stood up. Nothing. Couldn't have done it better myself. With that, she downed the rest of her beer and walked back to the cooler, this time opening a box next to it and grabbing a bottle of Senson tequila.
So, it's gonna be that kind of night, huh?
Okay, if we're really gonna do this, I'm gonna head back and grab a jacket, Judy announced. Gonna be a long night, it seems. Judy started towards the tent but stopped when V grabbed her hand. V stood up before letting go of her and, in a quick motion, unzipped her jacket and peeled it off. She then turned the jacket in her hand and then held it up with an expectant look. Madam, your coat. Judy laughed as she playfully turned around and allowed V to slide the sleeves over her arms and place the jacket over her. As she felt the heavy leather weigh down on her shoulders, Judy let out a barely audible moan as she felt V's warmth against her cool skin. Judy pulled the jacket tighter to her as she turned around to face V. Thanks. That's what I'm here for, V replied as she pulled Judy closer and wrapped her lean arms around her neck. So how you doing? Judy smiled warmly as she felt her eyes beginning to grow heavy. Right now, swimming on top of the world. V smiled as she gently rested her forehead against Judy's, both of them allowing the unspoken sweetness to sink in. Judy closed her eyes, allowing herself to get lost in the moment. Hey, you two, Panam's voice called out, causing Judy and V to glance over. She was holding up the bottle of tequila in one hand and had a trio of shot glasses in the other. Let's get this party started. Hours later, the fire had died down and the camp had gone quiet. It was well after midnight, and Panam had packed it in nearly an hour earlier, mumbling something to herself about being the responsible one before stumbling off to her tent. Judy and V lay on a large blanket that V had run off to grab earlier when she had started to complain about the chill in the air and had wrapped it around themselves to keep warm. As they had found themselves alone and were both feeling the effects of the shots of tequila they had recently downed, they had cuddled against one another and were now gazing up at the stars as they quietly talked with one another. In the time since they had met, Judy had learned a great deal about V's personality and her behavior, not to mention her more recent history. She realized as they talked, though, that there was still so much about each other that they didn't know, and she suspected V had realized the same thing as they talked and questioned one another about anything they could think of. Judy adjusted slightly so that she could more easily see V, who was still refusing to budge from her side. My turn. Favorite color? Take a guess, V laughed and pointed to her hair. You? I'm gonna go with blue. You seem like a blue lover. Right on, Judy replied with a smile. Should have seen me a couple years back. All this was blue. Judy motioned to her hair, eliciting a look of surprise from V that made Judy's heart warm. What made you guess that? Really? I mean, seahorses, a whale, a shark, ocean quotes. Do I need to go on? V pointed to the spots on Judy where she knew each tattoo lay under the jacket. Kinda obvious, Jude. Hell, you've probably got one or two I still haven't seen hidden somewhere. Judy felt V's arm tighten around her and pull her close. Judy winked back at V and continued on. Okay, here's another one for you. You said earlier you were thinking about what's in store for us. So, any for your thoughts? V didn't respond immediately, and Judy wondered if she was pondering her answer or the question itself. When some time had passed and V still hadn't said anything, Judy decided that she needed to press V.
I want to find a home somewhere.
Hey, you still in there? Judy asked as she gently tapped V on her head. V chuckled, breaking her silence. Yeah, sorry. Guess with all this, V gestured toward her head, going on, everything that's been going on, it's just been hard trying to think about what's next. V turned and looked directly into Judy's eyes, causing her heart to flutter for a moment. But I have been thinking about it, Jude. Not just for me, but for us. Judy felt V's hand gently squeeze her own. And I think, like you, I'm done with that phase of my life. Just don't see myself going back to gigs and contract work. I mean, it's what I've done my whole life, but it just doesn't, I don't know. Just doesn't mean anything to me anymore, you know? How much fucking time did I waste running around doing stupid, dangerous shit for Eddies? V sighed. So, I'm not sure what I want to do now. I had a few ideas. Could get an apartment somewhere far away from Night City. Or maybe a cozy little place near the ocean, like the bungalow we stayed at our first night together. Maybe a boat so we could go diving. I don't know. Like I said, I got thoughts, but... I mean, what do you want, Judy? While she was appreciative of the window V had opened into her thoughts, Judy hadn't been prepared for the question to be directed back at her. After a little consideration, Judy shrugged. I like those ideas. Kinda agree. Ain't going back to peddling smut, that's for damn sure. Had some ideas for how to use BDs differently, like ways to help people. I guess maybe I'd like to give that a shot, set myself up independently and get my own little studio somewhere where I could dive into work all by myself. Judy saw V's gaze falter slightly and quickly added with a smile. Meaning not in the basement of a bar with Susie dropping in all the time. And said studio could be anywhere, except perhaps on that boat you mentioned. V's smile returned. Then it's settled. Just need to pick a spot. V, it was just a thought. You got some say in this too, you know. I know, it's just... You got real talent. And not just talent, but you've got a passion for it. And that's something you should always chase after, Jude. Never let anyone hold you back. And since my talents are no longer going to be in use and I'll be spending some considerable time trying to find some new ones, I'll be plenty happy sticking with you wherever we decide to call home. Just want to be close by as you chase your dreams. Judy had managed to keep her emotions from creeping through her expression as V spoke, but her pulse had steadily picked up and was now pounding in her chest. Had V been able to see through the intent of her question that easily? In that moment, she felt a vulnerability which was new to her, and a set of unfamiliar words suddenly appeared on the tip of her tongue, though Judy managed to keep them from spilling out.
I love you.
I mean, if that's okay with you, V asked. Judy saw the concern on her face and realized her lack of response had likely triggered a small panic attack in V. She gently cupped V's cheek in her hand and traced her palm over the side of V's head, causing V to close her eyes and smile. Judy briefly paused at a small mark near her neural implant, tracing the faint scar that resided there. It was a permanent reminder of the bullet which had pierced through her head just months earlier, and would have ended her life right then and there, had it not been for the biochip. It was odd that something which was now killing her was the very same thing that had saved her life back then. I think it's preem, V. V smiled, and the two returned to staring back at the stars for some time. Judy was starting to feel drowsy, but was also relishing this time and didn't want it to end. Next question. So, V? V glanced at Judy with a blank expression upon her face before her brow narrowed in confusion. What? Judy chuckled. No. I mean, what's V for? Unless you're saying your real name is just a letter of the alphabet. V quickly turned back to the stars, and Judy could see that the question had suddenly made her uncomfortable. She felt a pang of regret mixed with confusion. The question itself had seemed innocent enough, though, and Judy was simply too curious to let it go. After a moment, V replied in an oddly vacant tone. Not tonight, Jude. Please. She turned her head back to Judy and continued. It's got nothing to do with trust. I remember what you told me, and I will trust you. I mean, I do trust you. Just, tonight's been amazing, and I want to keep it that way. I promise. We'll get to that one another day, okay? V's voice had changed, and her last words had come out almost as a plea. Judy looked into V's eyes and saw something in them which looked... Was that desperation? It brought a chill to her skin. Not wanting to ruin the moment or push V too far, she decided not to press it and to file the question away for another time. Sure, V. Sorry. Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. V smiled once again, though Judy could see a hint of sadness in it which caused the question to pop up in her mind once again. It's okay, Jude. Those were the last words they spoke that night, as they soon fell asleep lying next to each other under the stars.